Let's go to our panel now. A former long-time Labor advisor, now Principal Advisory Managing Partner Ryan Liddell, and former Liberal MP Jason Falinski. Gentlemen, great to see you both. Ryan, we saw this tweet from Prime Minister and Cabinet. They've put out saying that they're in caretaker. They're not yet because Parliament's still sitting, but it's a bit of a sign that the election is about to kick off, my friend.
I think that's right, Kieran. I walked past the Prime Minister on the way to the studio today downstairs, so I can assure you he hasn't gone to the Governor-General's house, and the writs haven't been issued yet. But I think, calling the election tomorrow, as per speculation sort of swirling around this building, would be a smart thing to do. There's a real sense within government ranks, there's a bit of momentum back with the government, wind in the sails. And remember a few sort of weeks ago, all the commentators were saying that the government delivering a budget would be a disaster for them. They really didn't want to do it, drag kicking and screaming to it post-tropical cyclone Alfred. But since then, the government's really pivoted, sees the agenda, and the momentum is certainly with the government as they sort of head into the campaign.
Jason, what's your read on that, on the eve of the election, but also this contest between now the tax cut plan, the top-up tax cut, as Jim Chalmers calls it, versus their temporary reduction in the fuel excise?
Look, I think the problem, I disagree with Ryan strongly. I mean, my reading of the budget, most major economists, Labor had to drag in a whole bunch of influencers to try and get their message out, is this budget has gone down very, very badly. It did have a sense of a bit like a lot of my university assignments, that it was started the night before, and we've seen that, the whole thing has been, they're trying to replicate the tactics of the Victorian government, debt and deficit, and we've seen how that ends up after a few years. There are a lot of good talking points here for Labor going into the election. The reality is, though, in economic terms, this isn't going anywhere, and it doesn't really answer the questions of where Australians are feeling at the moment that their country is going backwards. And if I were Labor, I would actually, for a bunch of reasons, I wouldn't announce the election for at least a week, including the fact that if they announce it tomorrow, that'll put pre-poll in the middle of Easter and the middle of Anzac Day, and I don't think Australians are going to appreciate that very much.
Ryan, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, look, I think if you talk about, there's obviously a bit of pressure on Peter Dutton tonight with his budget reply last week. There were Liberal MPs saying that there wasn't much of an economic plan from the opposition. Now, they're going to have to go back to their electorates tonight and sell a message that if Peter Dutton becomes Prime Minister, every single working taxpayer in this country will have their taxes increased if he wins the election. So their plan for the election is to increase your taxes next year, then increase your petrol prices the year after. I'm not sure that's the economic plan that Liberal MPs were calling for when they started leaking against Angus Taylor. So I think that the government were quite surprised by the fact that the Liberal Party, the coalition, didn't sort of just match the tax cuts that went through and move on.
Should Labor did you think the government might have thought about matching the fuel excise reduction?
I think the contest now, I've seen the stuff that's been leaked to the papers about the fuel excise announcement. I think when you're comparing tax cuts for every working Australian and fuel excise, I think tax cuts through so much stronger than anything in relation to fuel excise. The idea that Labor candidates and Labor MPs can sit there and say taxes will be lower under us, taxes will be higher under them, is a really difficult message for candidates.
Jason, Andrew Clennell and I were talking before and asking, has there been a Liberal leader that's opposed a tax cut before? That's a risky move.
Oh, there have been plenty of Liberal leaders that have opposed a tax cut. But look, as Professor Richard Holden pointed out yesterday, what Jim Chalmers and what Anthony Albanese offered the Australian people on Tuesday night was that over the next 5 years, your taxes will increase by $25,000 and we will give you back $5,000 of that. If Australians think they're getting a tax cut under that budget, then they're delusional. It's not happening. Your taxes are going up. They're going up substantially.
Reduction, is that going to be the policy that will help counter the tax plan?
I think so, because I think it's much better targeted. In political terms, it's much better targeted. I mean, Ryan said last time we were on, and I think it was, amongst the many wise things he said, the point that he made was that the key electorates are in the outer suburban seats of our major cities. Fuel and toll road charges are the two big key factors that a lot of people in those electorates think about, along with mortgage rates or interest rates. So by targeting one of the big three cost of living issues, I think you're kind of on the mark.
And finally, gents, Jason, first to you on this, the Teal polling that JWS has done, it looks like Goldstein might go back to Tim Wilson, according to those numbers. Kooyong's also very close. What do you make of that? What do you read into it for the broader battle against the Teals for the Liberals?
Well, I think, number one, I think Tim Wilson's done an excellent job in Goldstein, and you would expect him to win that seat back. I think that there are specific issues state by state, and so Victoria and Western Australian Teals are really rowing hard against the current. I wonder how Andrew Clennell feels about Tim Wilson's return to the Parliament, but you can ask him that later. And I would also suggest to you that Amelia Hamer would almost certainly be in front today, because that poll was taken before the revelations that Monique Ryan's husband was taking down her signs. Okay. So, yeah, I think those seats look like they're coming back to us.
Jason, thanks. Ryan, just finally to you on that taking down the signs thing. It doesn't get much worse in terms of the optics. Up against a young woman, Amelia Hamer, you've got your husband pulling down signs.
Oh, it's a shocker. I mean, you just don't do that sort of thing, right? And especially if you're being shot on camera, so to speak. So, I mean, you asked Jason before about the polling. I've seen some individual seat polling, Goldstein and Kooyong, which is a little bit more favourable to the Teals. But having said that, it is tight. But one thing I am hearing out of Kooyong is that Amelia Hamer will probably be much more further ahead if she was being helped a bit more by Josh Frydenberg. Apparently he's really down tools and making it quite difficult for her to sort of campaign and not helping in the way that he could be helping. So we'd read into that what you will, but I think there are a few other things at play there.
Ryan and Jason, we'll see you next week, hopefully. Thanks, gents.